our next toolkit session is with Andrea Learned. And this one is focusing on climate conversion storytelling and something that is titled The Surprising Validator. I'm going to let Andrea explain more of that. Oh, I think Andrea is here standing by. Andrea, hi.
Hi.
Hello. It is really nice to welcome you here this morning. Some of your conversation today is really going to be about consulting. You consult as a leadership strategist. You use influencer relations, you use story shaping, and also community media engagement as your key tools, which I'm sure those are lots of people getting excited already. Their antennas are up. But I'm really curious to hear more about what you call the surprising validators. So these are not celebrities. They might be farmers or political leaders or even consumers. So you believe that now is a really great time to find and to create a platform or place for engagement for those voices to tell their stories in their own words. I hope that summarizes a lot of what you're going to get into today.
Wonderful, wonderful.
I'm going to
Thank
leave you the space and the microphone for the next 30 minutes. I really encourage everyone to ask lots of questions, and the earlier you ask them, the easier it will be for us to make sure we've understood what you want to know. So do jump in anytime on Slido and ask Andrea your great questions. Andrea, thank you very much for being here, and I hand you the mic.
Thank you. Wonderful to be here. I'm going to do the sharing screen thing here. So let's see. Oh, here we go. Okay. Sorry, this is a little clunky. And all right, back to the beginning. Okay, great. I'm really excited to be here because, as Saroja said, this is such a critical time for this. With the climate emergency, basically now we have less than 10 years. I'm really sort of compelled to yell and be really vocal about there's some huge opportunities that are being missed. And so this is what I wanted to present. First of all, a little bit on me, that's who I am. I'm not going to read that for you, but all that is to say that I've been in communication strategy, in corporate sustainability, in climate action, and kind of leadership platform development for quite some time. I think the main point of this is that I have this emphasis on how to build and leverage social capital, which you'll see as I'm talking about. And also, just so you know, what I'm going to talk about is a practice of my daily work. So I have been watching the way journalists write about this, watching the way things are shared on Twitter, watching how people are engaging or not engaging. And that is the background for what I want to share with you guys. So this is wonderful because first, I know that good presentations have great examples in research and they're all dialed in with that. But I was in a little bit of a conundrum because one of the reasons I wanted to present this was I'm seeing a lack of it. And so I have to say this is so kismet that I was reading the New York Times on Sunday and up pops this story by Kevin Roose on President-elect Joe Biden's election strategy. And the article talked about a few key decisions that were made. And the very first on the list was lean on influencers and validators. And I think Lasse Brun, the executive director of 50 by 40, will realize why this made my heart sing. One of the other points in that was that people who were trusted by the kinds of voters the campaign hoped to reach, those are the validators. And then just to add to the surprise, they talked about how it wasn't the typical kind of validators or influencers that they were looking for, but one of the key influencers they think in this digital strategy of theirs was Brene Brown, who I'm not sure how known she is globally, but she's very well known in North America and probably Europe as I think she's a sociologist, but she's an academic, an author, and a podcast host who emphasizes leaders and sort of the way people lead and interact with life to really embrace empathy and vulnerability. So it's just like, what? That was a person who helped win an election and really reached a lot of people. And that's why I love the surprising validator story. And I was so excited to read that. So back to how did this even come up for me? When I thought, I wrote an article a couple months ago, I think, and I was just really, it was bugging me that what we really need are these moments of conversion. We need to tap into the moment of conversion. What converted somebody from climate denial to like, oh my goodness, this does impact me, that sort of thing. And so I looked up skepticism, climate change, all that sort of stuff. And what I came up with was wonderful. It was a 2019 piece by Scott O. Lilienfeld in what the journal is called The Skeptical Inquirer. And the article was Skepticism and the Persuasive Power of Conversion Stories. And I just thought, yay, nailed it. And I think it so hits and aligns with this incredible climate emergency. Further in that article, he says, moreover, legal scholar Cass Sunstein and his colleagues have written of the persuasive power of surprising validators, people who would not typically expect to support a position, but who end up doing so. And I have the citation right there for you. That article went on to point out this example, which I think is a good one. A fervent believer in astrology who later becomes convinced that astrology is unscientific can function as a surprising validator, communicating to others her change of heart and the reasons for it. I think we can all name a topic where we have to do a better job communicating to reach and persuade folks who are not yet on board, right? Wow, it's dire. So one more thing before I go any further, I definitely want to acknowledge that my taken examples and framing are from a white American privileged background. But in years of sharing and observing this and working in global climate action and the environmental communication worlds, I found that these basic guidelines, these basic points can be applied anywhere. And so that's part of why I'm really looking forward to your specific questions later. Mainly, I want to point out that a surprising validator works as a strategy to reach humans with challenging to them new perspectives. So humans, those are the people we're all trying to reach. So this is what I'll discuss today. 1, how to identify the people with the most powerful conversion stories for your purposes. 2, how to capture their stories and turn them into evergreen at the ready content. And 3, and this may be the most important, how to proactively feed these stories into timely, topical, of the moment discussions to reach broader audiences. First, how to identify the people with the most powerful conversion stories. I'm somebody who learns a lot from listening to podcast interviews. And I really enjoy interviews with journalists because I love hearing how they researched and how they frame their stories. Long form is one podcast that I just love. And really, they often are talking to investigative journalists about deep dive stories that took them months and months and months to do. And it is fascinating. I'm finding that regularly, one of the questions that the hosts are asking is the really obvious ones. How do you find the people who help you best tell your stories? And the people they are seeking, I would suggest, tend to be surprising validators. And the response, as I put in the slide, is just start talking to people on the ground. Trust them to point you toward the best folks to interview. In other words, you won't off the top of your head, or the 2 people you know on the ground may not be the people you're looking for. But if you said, hey, I'm looking for a former farmer who worked in industrial agriculture who's now doing regenerative practices and has a really interesting story, I bet it wouldn't take you long to find that person. So my guess, and you guys can tell me in the questions and answers, that you all immediately are thinking of at least one person that you already know in your global area, in your specific sector, who has a really interesting story to tell. If you even go to that one person and say, are there others like you? That could be another way to identify these people. So in the food systems transition space, that might be, and I just saw this as a piece that was in Veg News like a week ago. 6th-generation cattle rancher switches to plant-based farming. These guys, this picture, these people are surprising validators, big time. And that story in Veg News, I would suggest it can't only be in Veg News. We need to get these stories more mainstream. But these are the surprising validators. I mean, if I were you, I might contact this family and see if you could write an op-ed with them. Just these stories need to get out. Another example of a surprising validator is, and it's going to sound very stereotypical, but I think it's true, a white male person from Texas. And he is a plant-based convert because of his diet. And the reason this is so important is in the US, as I think most global people know, the West and the East Coast are a little bit more progressive, and everything just sort of gets stuck with middle America. And this particular guy is from a state that is a cattle ranching, that's really DNA cattle ranching. And so for a white male to become a plant-based convert and to be telling his story really publicly is extremely powerful and a surprising validator that a lot of organizations that are really talking about the consumer change, the consumer diet change, could really start to leverage stories like this. The third one is one that those of us in the US are really counting on right now, and that's US Senator Cory Booker. He is a policymaker with a lot of influence who is now really forwarding this end factory farming policy. And he is a very quiet vegan in his personal lifestyle. He's never made a big fuss about it or talked about it a lot. And he talks about in this article that I have kind of linked at the bottom of the slide, excuse me, he talks about how he started going vegetarian because he read Gandhi in college. So this is a sort of surprising validator for a lot of reasons, right? He's a very influential senator. He's a person of color. He's male, all the stereotypes he's sort of countering. So this is another example of you could take this surprising validator and start to figure out how to find people like this in your own communities, the leaders who happen to be vegan but have not been talking about it, and then start to mine for those stories. So these are just 3 big examples. So I want to just return to this definition of surprising validators. People we would not typically expect to support a position, but who end up doing so. This is the gold. And this is the gold that I do not think has been tapped yet. The opportunity here lies in more human, less crafted connecting stories. One surprising validator is worth so much more than endless blog posts covering policy or scientific studies or really lightweight mention of people who've converted. Digging in and really getting to the authentic kind of human connection of why a person did this is really critical. So that's we just talked about a little bit about how to identify these people. And it seems really obvious, but now I think you hopefully have a better understanding of what I mean, really digging in. The second thing I want to talk about is how to capture their stories and turn them into evergreen at the ready content. And I will also say here, I am not an expert at on-the-ground tactics of how this all works, but I do, from my years of experience, have high-level strategic ideas for the ways that this could work in content production and things like that. Also, I want to make a note that what I'm suggesting here is really a shift in your content strategy. I'm not saying, okay, all that stuff that you're doing, all that your communications teams are on, and then add this. I'm saying step back from what you've been doing and all the blog posts you're doing and all the other content you're doing and really think about if that's going to be as compelling as this and how you can feed this in. So I don't want to add to your time. I want you to think more strategically about where you're spending your time in crafting and developing these stories to share. So one thing I really suggest is to do a master file video interview. And as we know, that may not be the highest quality thing. We're going to be doing it on Zoom. It is what it is. What I want you to see is that this is not something that you're ever going to show to anybody. It's a master file. And what it's going to deliver to you is audio clips, video clips that you can put into little short 3-minute things. It's going to deliver to you a transcript of a whole conversation with this surprising validator that you can then turn into a blog post or that you can take quotes out for other blog posts. This is just going to become your seed, your focus for creating a whole content package that is going to be revisited and used over and over again. Let's see. And I just want to emphasize, the idea is to mine. You do the one masterpiece, and then you really look at all the different ways it can be used. And in fact, you may not think of all the ways it can be used right away. You may, like 6 months from now, go, oh my gosh, remember in the video when that person said this? Let's pull that out. It will serve this purpose. So I want you to keep returning to it and thinking about repackaging. The final thing I really want to emphasize is this being proactive to feed these incredible stories that you've put time into, that you've been really strategic about doing only 3 to 5 really great content packages a year, feed them into timely, topical, of the moment discussions that reach broader audiences. This is something I've seen a lot, once and done. There's a huge to do. You do a report, you interview a couple of people, and you make a big push right in front of an event. All of this stuff, it's once and done. And then you've got this great page that's an archive of testimonials or something like that. You put the content there, never to look at it again, not categorized. You have no idea that you've got a great ranching story turned into a bamboo and fava bean. That's what those ranchers I shared with you earlier, they turned into being bamboo and fava bean farmers. So you have to keep thinking about this content. You're going to put this time into packaging it. You've got to know you're going to use it a lot. You're going to continually refer. You're going to link to them from social media, et cetera, et cetera. And I really emphasize not wasting, doing it as well as you can, and then returning to it. So as I said earlier, the idea is to choose not to take the more typical approach of, we've got all these blog posts, we've got to do this, we've got a big funnel, we've got to fill it with content, we've got to do X number of tweets, we've got to do this. So this is the thing that I have studied, and that's become sort of the key of what I do for my clients, and that is this proactive part. As you see stories or discussion on whatever social media platforms you might have capacity to monitor, that may only be Facebook, that may be Instagram, I don't know. It depends obviously on geography and all of that. But as you see stories or things that are bridging, that are timely news or announcements that you go, oh my gosh, that really bridges with this story that I've already got content ready on about the rancher who turned to plants farming, or the white male from Texas who is now a vegan and talks about it a lot. You need to look for those and figure out ways to get your links into those conversations. And so that might be, and I actually just did it today, and I'll share a couple examples with you. But say, for example, a climate journalist is writing about deforestation and climate change. Don't just reshare or like that, but weave your work into the discussion. Reply to that journalist's tweet of that article with, great story. We actually talked with a person who did just that, or who's impacted, or who is a worker in this particular area right here, and you link to it. The point is not that journalist is going to immediately go, oh yes, I must interview you. The point is that you are getting your links into a bigger conversation that's happening, and many, many more audiences are reading it. And if anybody's at all interested in that topic, they're probably going to go through the replies to that journalist share and just see what's there. You become a resource. You become a very helpful value add in this bigger discussion. The more you do that, the more journalists and other people will go, they're doing some great stuff over there. I'm just going to go to their site and look at really what they're all about. So basically the audience that's going to be replying to the journalist or the academic or the research or the announcement, they're pre-vetted, if you will, to be interested in the topic and looking for more surprising validators to help them in their work in the broader picture. So I would love it if, for the Q&A, if any of you can come up with a recent news story that's very particular for your sector or your area, it really got buzzing, and then think about who, if you know a surprising validator on the ground, who that would be. Present that idea to me, and I might have some ideas of how you can do that. So there are many ways to be more proactive, but just as in my call that you need to do the front end work, that researching to find the right surprising validators, the right stories, that may take a little bit more time. Same with this proactive part is a part that very few organizations do. And this is something that I found is lacking, and that what you need to be doing is helping others find you. You can't just go, here it is, it's all on our website. We don't know why anyone's coming. No one's coming to our site. We don't know. You need to be out there doing that. I guess I didn't have, let me see. Oh yeah, I did. I just put these up. Yay, I remembered. So these are examples from today, you guys, and they're not directly to this point, but it's related. So I know that Dina Shanker is a writer for Bloomberg on food, and I follow her. I've never done a hard sell on what 50 by 40 is doing or anything like that. I just follow her and engage. And yesterday she posted this: fixing the food system is fundamental to so much of our country's current state. You can read it. What I just did now was make sure that she sees the food engaged 20 tag and takes a little look over at what we're up to. I also, because she knows me yesterday from just doing this, right, from sharing her work and chiming in occasionally, usually always in a positive way. It's yes, what you're writing, and this, take a look at this. She's used to me. So I replied to something that she did yesterday, and I just said, hey, they were just talking about this at 50 by 40's event. Do you want me to forward you a link when the debrief for all the content is available? And she immediately got back to me and said yes. So that's one. Two, Chef Jose Andres just published a great piece in the New York Times specific to the US situation, but it really aligns again with this broader picture of what we're talking about. So I'm here this morning, he's on another event. I see this tweet. I immediately take it, tag him, and point to Food Systems COVID and Food Engage 20 so that he or anybody that's following him might see this and be pointed over to what's happening with 50 by 40's Global Engagement Summit. So those are just two, just now, examples of what proactive engagement looks like. And in this case, it's I'm pointing them to an event. But when you do these surprising validator story packages, content packages, you have that stuff ready. So what if we had an article ready on exactly what Dina was talking about related to the summit? I would be able to go, yes, take a look at this link. That's what I'm telling you. We get these surprising validators. No one else is working on this. And then we deliver it to them proactively. So there are many more ways to be proactive, but this is going to take a little bit more time. And that's why mainly I suggest that you think about a year where you do 3 to 5 deep dives and make these content packages. So this is what we discussed: how to identify the people with the most powerful conversion stories, how to capture those stories, and how to proactively feed them into timely topical discussions. Here's some resources. This is who I am. You can always find me basically at Andrea Learned on Twitter is where I am most available. Those 2 other links are articles that I've written that might be of interest. And that's it. So
thank you so much, Andrea.
Yeah.
These are really very, very practical examples. We already have tons of questions. So I'm going to jump right into them since we seem to have lots of interest. The questions are very different from each other. So we'll just take our time getting into them. Robert says, I would imagine that surprising validators are often people who are going against normalized practices of their communities and families. How can we encourage them to share their stories?
That's a great question. And I think one of the human behavior things that's related to this is no one ever asked them before. No one ever said, that is so cool that you did that. No one ever said, we've got a whole national campaign where we're trying to get more people to do this. If you tell them that, and say your voice is really important and would be super helpful, and we'll be very careful with how we do it, and we'll keep checking in with you all along the way. But that really, I think that's the thing. No one's asked them. I think that I shared that testimonial of that man, Adam, in Texas. Mm-hmm. That's on a website that's got a whole bunch of testimonials. And I bet those people may have been trying to hide it or not telling their communities even because it was so counter to what their culture is, that you get that on there and then you thank them. And then you say, you know what, we used your story again. Thank you again. And you keep that relationship going. Then they will then help you find more people, and you can all help each other feel more comfortable spreading this word. So that was a great question.
There's a question that occurs to me while you've been speaking about a lot of this, that sometimes people must want to amplify the voices of these validators, but it also means negotiating privilege. And you spoke about that a little bit at the very beginning, that sometimes those of us who hold the means for media, those of us with the skills to write, or those of us with the fancy camera or the computer or whatever skill set it is you need to get a message out there, also leans on a certain amount of privilege. How can people best negotiate that space between themselves and someone whose voice they want to honor and not interfere with, but also see themselves as being someone who can help amplify?
Well, I think that goes to kind of getting on the ground and understanding if the digital or the audio and all of that is just too much for the surprising validator to even consider. Everyone, I think a lot of people can understand written word. Start small, start with, we want to write a piece, or we want to put a piece here, or we want to put a piece on Facebook, which is a site that you're already, really dial into what they're comfortable with. Often it's not going to be audio, digital. I don't have a good computer, all of that. But again, really support them and just start to warm them up to the idea and the methods. And then ultimately you can say, that piece we just wrote in that teeny tiny way on some site that you were able to go to, or some booklet, I don't know, right? It could be print. We're still able to use that. We've now converted that. It again is empowering to them to like get into the process, figure out how to get them into the process, and then kind of grow along with them. Maybe it isn't ever going to get on a website or an audio clip. That doesn't matter. If that isn't really what's going to be useful for you on the ground, again, maybe it is a booklet, maybe it's leaflets. I don't know how, all different communities are doing this all over the world, but it's just helping people amplify their voice in a place where they're comfortable, whatever the method or the media, and going from there.
Okay. I'm going to turn to a question from James. James asks, what do you think are the best ways to share or promote your surprising validators in ways to reach new audiences?
That is part of the mining process. So you're looking at it and you're categorizing it and saying, oh, this is interesting. I'll go to the plant-based diet, the guy who transitioned his diet. This is interesting because it really speaks to a public health topic. It also really speaks to a toxic masculinity topic. You need to look at the story and put some categories around it for all the little pieces. Again, you're mining it. It isn't just, here's a story, we're going to put it out there. It's like, what was really going on with that guy? Of course, the Texan guy, there was the masculinity situation, right? Vegans aren't masculine. That's a stereotype. And then the other thing is diabetes. A lot of people, and this is, I guess it's a great point, because it's like, what are a lot more people going to connect to? So a lot of people will connect to, I have diabetes, or a loved one has diabetes. Oh my goodness, what can we do? And so then that might be the piece of that person's story that you really share. And then you might see an opportunity where they're talking about toxic masculinity and food systems or whatever, then that piece also serves that purpose. So there are all these different ways, again, once you've mined it, to find the category. Do you think that's enough of an answer for that question?
I certainly do. It's a really broad question. You could probably do an entire presentation on that question alone, but I think that was a really succinct way to come at it. There's a question from Joanna who has a technical question. Is there any editing program, preferably for free, in particular that you would recommend using for this mining of videos that you've been discussing? Are there any other tool recommendations that have helped you in your journey through social media and the journalism world?
Well, I'm so glad that I gave the caveat earlier that I am not a technical person, nor do I know tools for mining videos. But this is what I would do, knowing nothing and being non-technical at all. If you can get a video, or if you can get an audio of whatever it is, listen to it, right? Just listen to it and go, okay, that's interesting. And again, you don't have to go listen to it really hard and get it all figured out right away. It's like, okay, today I'm going to listen to see if there's anything about ranching, that would help with my plant-based farmer. You look for that. And then I will say that if transcribing is very expensive, but I'm trying to get more of my clients to do that right away. But that's the other thing, is if you have access to somebody who can transcribe and put it again on paper, then it's easier to point those things out. Yeah.
If you have, it seems to me that there's a really long trajectory that we have to consider here. So there is the conversation about where are you at, what media is going to work for you, how do you want to tell your story? But what about the other side of it? Let's say the impact of the story, let's say with the fellow in Texas, that it hadn't gone well. I mean, we live in a very reactive media environment. Things can get shared, they can get shared out of context, and all of a sudden you've put someone on a bit of an ice floe and pushed them out there with their voice attached, their ideas attached to something that now lives organically in the world. What do you do to kind of put a buffer around that person, or to protect them, or to help them out if things don't go the way that was planned?
Yeah, I think that again has to do with always dialing really into their comfort level. And I think having that testimonial, that person's testimonial is on the site with a lot of other testimonials. They likely had to really get his permission to do that. And again, but this is a really good question, because most of these sites that I see that do these testimonials that sit there, they're not proactively using them. So they aren't reopening the story that maybe that person ultimately had a little kickback initially, and then they were fine, but then it keeps coming back up. So that is a really good question. And I would say that you definitely should be welcome to pull that down, right? If that's really what happens. But I do think that part of this process of the deep dive with them initially and really crafting these stories and creating that content is that you're building a trusting relationship, and that you'll keep the conversation open and really talk with that person if something's happening about how this isn't working. And maybe it's you pull the video down, but you can keep the blog post, or I think there's some ways like that. But I think it's going to be unique to the situation. But again, it's about the relationship and just supporting them and maybe nudging them to be a teeny bit bolder, but totally having a drop, like, no way, we're going to take this off if they ask for that.
Right.
But again,
it's interesting. It's like you're trying to find the sweet spot between where they're comfortable and where you can push things a little bit, and where it could be dangerous, or where they're too far out of their comfort zone. You really seem to, like, I hear the word listening over and over and over again in this. It seems to be like a really core part of the work.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because was going to maybe use an example. The other big half of the work that I do in the world is in this getting more people to ride bikes for climate. And what I'm finding is, in terms of engagement on Twitter and kind of how I do that, is building that community. When I see someone on Twitter say, oh my goodness, I just got a bike, I haven't ridden in whatever, I immediately go and I go, that is so great. That is so great. So you start, and I don't have any ultimate purpose, but I want that person to get in this community. And then I was saying, on a bigger scale, that Bikes for Climate is a great example, because the mayor of Paris is a nut about biking, and you will see pictures of her on the bike with the helmet doing transportation in the city of Paris, as opposed to Mayor de Blasio in New York, who's always in a big black SUV, even to go to the YMCA. And so she's a surprising validator, and she's normalizing it. Yeah, I mean, I'm getting off on a tangent, but remind me what the question was.
Oh, there wasn't. It was just a chat. I like it. It's like we have 2 cups of coffee steaming away, and you're just telling me all the interesting ideas you have.
I can go on.
I want to go to a question from LB, who says, COVID-19 has changed the game for online engagement. Yeah, no kidding. As many people were forced into it, how do we maximize this situation and stand out in this increasingly crowded space? Interesting.
It is a great question. And it's one of the reasons that I emphasize so much in what I do, this idea of building social capital in advance of when you need it. So one of the reasons that I'm always talking, or that the work that I even do with 50 by 40, we've been building relationships on Twitter, and everyone on the team teases me about, I call it loving up. We've been loving up journalists and other influencers, really focused on the key people. If we could get X journalists to write about this, it would be amazing. If we could get X climate leader thinking about us, it would be amazing. What is that? What is that teeny tiny little list of those people? To make lists of those people, start to develop those relationships now, knowing that you've got some huge event in June, or a huge COP, later in 2021. How can you start to build relationships with them? And this is a whole other seminar that I do, and that this is a big part of my work. It isn't about, well, we reached out to so-and-so journalist and immediately the next day they did an article on us. It's like, you know what, in a dream world, this journalist would write a piece on us. How are we going to get there? We get the surprising validator. We start to tell us stories. We see that journalist wrote X article. We can feed that in. We're never hard selling. We're never hard pitching. That person warms up to us. We keep watching them on Twitter. So it's a building of a love up, kind of a social capital that you then leverage only at key points when you really need it.
It's really different from the traditional understanding of how we approach media. Is still press release, cold call, original contact, starting with the story in hand. And what you're really talking about is building relationships and positioning yourself in a media environment, regardless of how big or small you are as an entity, or even if you're as an individual.
And to your point, you're a journalist, right? How often do you get these press releases in your mailbox and you're just like, I can't take it. It could be the most amazing thing in the world, And the other thing is surprising, right? It is surprising when an organization or a comms person or whatever is behind the scenes doing this. And in a way, you are warming up that relationship. And journalists are so used to people coming at them and going, this is the most amazing story, you must run it. And journalists are like, yeah. And so you've got to stop it. You have to stop. And again, I will go back to time. You can spend all your time doing press releases that no one's going to read, have at it. But that's why the storytelling and building the social capital with journalists and the people that you want to influence and dialing it in. You can't influence 50 top journalists. Go in a dream. These 10 journalists we'd have relationships with. And you focus on those 10 people. So keep shrinking stuff down. I'm telling you to shrink stuff down.
I'm going to go to our next question. This is interesting. This is from Arturo. What happens when validators backtrack? How can we reshape the story? For example, time and time again, we see influential people go vegan and then they go back to eating meat.
That is an interesting question. One of the things that makes me think is that you misjudged the validator from the beginning. And I will say celebs, right? They're all these Instagram people who've gone vegan, or they're podcast hosts, and they're doing this and then they're countering. And in a way, it's kind of akin to Trump. It's like, whatever is going to get people's attention, I'm going to do it. And so I think with a deep dive, and when I'm thinking about these surprising validators, I'm thinking about somebody who exists, who no one knows about, these are really, really small time validators. So I would say do the front end work, and really you want a surprising validator, not an influencer to everybody else. And if you really dial into that, you are less likely to have that problem, because they are blown away by their conversion. It was almost a religious conversion that got them to change their behavior. So they're not gonna, and you're gonna work with them and you're gonna get a feel for them. This whole time you're crafting stories and talking to them and figuring this out, you're gonna go, wait a second, this guy isn't legit. And you can back off way early. So I just think it's really dialing into who that validator is gonna be early on.
It seems to be a constant practice of monitoring and talking and really keeping the communication open. And listening all the time. We have a question from Margarita, who will also like the conversation on privilege. Thanks. How best to respond to comments that minimize or simplify your argument? For example, why do we need to worry about animals when people are suffering, or meat consumption when 800 million people are hungry? So I guess we're getting really into some of those arguments that get triggered by a validator's story from time to time.
Well, I would say you have to that's what your validator will supply for you, right? So again, you can't make this stuff up or prepare some major structured statement about this or whatever. Why? You ask the person who's done the transition. Ask them why, and ask them how they would talk to somebody about 8 million people are dying of hunger. How do you respond to that? So again, we want to keep it in an authentic voice. We don't want to all of a sudden go, oh, wow, we didn't think of that. We got to structure some major statement for our organization about why that happened. It's all in the story and why they tell it.
We only have 5 minutes left, Margarita. I hope you got a fulfilling answer there. I'm sorry that we're sort of rushing through things now. I just want to make sure we have 2 more questions left. One is from Rishi and one is from Joanna. And they are also, Andrea, you're gonna have to bear with us because these are some big, thoughtful questions that are coming your way with all of 5 minutes to answer them.
I keep pushing them off though. I keep going, I don't know the answer.
I don't know. We've gotten some really, really interesting things to think about here. And there's it's really a skills building practice that you're talking about.
Yep.
So Rishi says, sounds like it might be very useful to use principles from nonviolent communication to engage with surprising validators. That's interesting. So that'd be an extension of what we were speaking about earlier, about building those relationships. What would you say to that, Andrea?
I say yes. I say brilliant idea. And I say, I know that, I'm newer to this space, but I know that nonviolent communication has been, a guiding, core guiding principle for a lot of organizations like this. And I think, yes. It's very similar to building social capital, leading with love, etc. And then all of that helps you go, wait, this isn't going to work way early on. And so I say yes to nonviolent communication being a wonderful framing for it.
The very last question is from Joanna, who says, I feel there are a lot of people feeling a certain disconnect from Twitter, Instagram, really any online story and thought sharing platform. How would you address their reservations and inspire them to join the community?
Well, that's like my entire life, Joanna. So one, and I'm not saying this facetiously, I get this all the time from even like friends who are like, how do you do this Twitter thing? And I'm just like, follow me. One, follow me on Twitter. If you're curious about Twitter, follow me. A couple things I will say. Twitter and LinkedIn are really about B2B or organizational peer-to-peer. If you're on Instagram, Facebook, et cetera, it's, and this will change globally, right? From my very American EU perspective, Twitter and LinkedIn are really about B2B. Instagram and Facebook are more consumer facing, really consumer facing. And so the idea, wait, remind me what the question was again. I'm just losing it.
It was just about people feeling disconnected
Yes.
from social media and how to get them into the conversation in spite of that sense of being overloaded or despondent.
So I've written a lot about it and I've got these great tips and I appreciate that because people assume that because I do what I do, I'm just constantly, I'm sitting there, I'm watching it all day long and whatever. No. It's all about managing expectations. And if you're somewhat curious, find a person who's good on that platform who you know, start following them and just go, oh, curious, they just did it this way. Oh, I see how they commented on that. Watch them. And then the other thing is most of those of us who are on platforms that have kind of figured it out and enjoy it, right, or find it productive, I find it productive, we'd be willing to answer questions, right? So you need to find a mentor in a way. I do that, of course, for a lot of my friends, but it's also the kind of just teaching workshops and stepping back. And I definitely say this isn't about frantically being on every platform on demand. It's about going, you know what, Instagram appeals to me. It's going to be the one way to reach my community. I'm going to focus on that one. Who's a good person on Instagram? I'll follow them. So slowly getting into it, watching for however long it takes. I will say that I started one of the 50 by 40 team members. I said, listen, let's just have you try and use Twitter a little bit. And within like the first, actually I did this with a couple of the team members. Within the first couple of tweets, I just said, I helped them behind the scenes. I helped them craft it. I helped them think about it. They watched me a little bit. Their first couple of tweets, they got a response or they got a couple more followers and they were like, oh my goodness, right? So all it takes is just get started, right. Do it. Don't be afraid. Don't think you're going to spend 1 million hours on it. Just say, I'm going to do it 15 minutes a day, see what happens and walk away from it, right?
Well, some of what you're also saying is if we go back to the beginning of your talk, this kind of brings it full circle, which is that that sense of being overwhelmed, and there are so many stories out there. The validator, the person who's surprising, is going to help, I guess, pierce through some of that digital noise.
That's a great way to put it.
I have enjoyed this so much. You've given us so many different skills to work with. For anyone who's interested, you can also find more of Andrea's work on the agenda for the Global Engagement Summit. Her website has lots of tools and lots more information about the work that she does. Andrea, thank you so much for being with us today.
It was really fun. And thank you, everyone. Those were excellent questions. And I hope that I energized you because this is a climate emergency and there's this opportunity staring us in the face. Let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it. Thank you so much, Andrea.